90s Carpenter gets slept on more than it should. Yeah, it's not the powerhouse of his 80s run, but even his second-tier filmography is still superior to a hefty amount of genre directors today. But that's a different argument for a different day. One flick in particular that never got the love it always should is his last great entry of the 90s and, well, of his career. An edgy, ever so slightly satirical vampire story that just may be the closest thing to an actual Western Carpenter got to make. So same rules as always, grab a drink, maybe an edible. For the children at home, let's mind our language.
Excuse me. Language.
And explore the always entertaining vampires. Word on the street has it that Carpenter had become overly cynical about the film industry, and after the negative reaction to his only sequel, Escape from LA, it seems like he might have been done for good. Now, let's be honest, Carpenter being cynical isn't new, and a big reason why I've always respected the man. He had clearly seen the bullshit and isn't the type to waste his time.
I don't need this anymore. And, fine. Eli Roth and his Hollywood hair, let him rule now. Darren Aronofsky, secretly, I think, hates horror films. Let the geniuses go.
But along came the script and book for Vampires, which the rights to had been sitting with Largo Entertainment, and both which Carpenter liked. So he figured he could make this story work while many others couldn't, and thus gave him a bit of hope. Leaning into the Western themes and setting, he ended the 90s by giving us John Carpenter's Vampires. The 90s were going through a vampire boom, with more classic showings like Bram Stoker's Dracula and Interview with the Vampire, and more monstrous interpretations like From Dusk Till Dawn and Blade. Now, real quick, I should say that the Subspecies trilogy, yes, it ended at part 3 for me, also did this mix, but leaned more towards the creature look with the classic castle setting. Carpenter decided to go with a slightly more vintage look mixed with a monstrous ferocity. Having these creatures of the night be tied to the Catholic Church keeps it a little more old school, but aims to update them in a way that would be more sensible to modern audiences.
Garlic? Want to try garlic? You stand there with garlic around your neck. One of these buggers will bend you fucking over and take a walk up your Strata Chocolata while he's sucking the blood out of your neck, alright?
Thomas Ian Griffith as Valak perfectly encapsulates this. The vampire look is heavily influenced by the romantic leanings of the past, but has the intensity of the newer, at the time, incarnations. I mean, his punch reverse chop literally cuts Mark Boone Jr. in half. It shows respect for what came before, yet tweaking things here and there for a more edgy approach that pretty much always works. And a small detail like having the Master sleep underground as a safety measure gives us maybe one of the coolest awakening scenes. It's Carpenter showing us how to be cool with a simple yet masterfully executed idea. Aiming to make the lead character, in Carpenter's words, to be as savage as the prey he's going after, we get a career-high performance from James Woods, playing against type at the time, and honestly he's both exaggerated, low-key, and always on. Sure, the 90s version of being badass comes off a bit silly now, yet James Woods still commands every scene with an anger and overall apathy towards everyone, and it works wonders.
If you got something else to say, spit it the fuck out!
Sporting a leather jacket in the New Mexico heat, dark shades and slim cigars, like Neo in The Matrix, it's not something that will always be fashionably cool, but goddamn is he not one of the best and most humorous characters in Carpenter's filmography. Fighting with his co-workers, walking away from explosions, and taunting Valak as he's about to be burned on the cross. I mean, I could make an entire video of just Jack Crow quotes.
Huh? You get a little mahogany from that, a little ebony? Come on, tell the truth.
Shut the fuck up!
This was your fight, Cardinal. Now it is mine. You're not starting to fall for this half-dead old...
How's it look?
Like another New Mexican shithole.
And it should be noted that Carpenter let Woods try his lines 2 ways. As written, and then with some improvised quips. And he kept most of the improvised ones.
I was kicking your ass back there. Did I give you wood?
Daniel Baldwin, also written as Grumpy with a chip on his shoulder, plays Montoya, Crow's right-hand man who bonds with their captive Katrina after being bitten. And this may not be the most intricate character, but, like Woods, fits this gray area where he's both despicable and very entertaining. They both play off each other well, and though Vampires makes no effort to make them likable, and quick side note, good, not everybody needs to be a saint. Their friendship and professional attitude of doing what must be done adds some nice narrative stakes. And also, one of the best scenes with Montoya is when he's checking into the hotel to hunker down and wait for Crow. We get this gem of a line.
Is that your girlfriend?
No, it's my fucking mother. Give me the key.
I mean, to be honest with you, I kind of want this as my outgoing voicemail.
No, it's my fucking mother. Give me the key.
Now, I tend to agree with the masses that Cheryl Lee's Katrina should have had a beefier part. I mean, you got Laura fucking Palmer. But with the limited role, she owns it the best she can, and let me say here, her acting level to emote and relay information just with a stare is unmatched. I mean, she has these striking eyes that can tell an entire story. One could argue Carpenter has been making Western-influenced movies for most of his career. But Vampires was the first time it's clear that this was his starting point. We are watching a Western vampire tale unfold. We have the sweeping shots of the Southwest, sun-drenched cinematography. There's this filter used somewhat frequently that has a pink hue at the top that is just beautiful and sets the perfect visual tone. Carpenter, known to shoot in scope, always has a wide and gorgeous looking frame, and that still holds true here. His low-key score and the ending at the abandoned town. Vampires lets Carpenter finally scratch that lifelong itch. The concept of a first vampire is a cool idea, and using the church's method of an exorcism gone wrong as the origin of it is quite clever. Now, Carpenter did help rewrite the script, though he doesn't get writing credit. So to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what's from him and what was from earlier drafts, but either way, setting a Western around the origin of vampires mixes as well as rye whiskey and sweet vermouth. And for the non-whiskey drinkers here, that means it mixes perfectly. Something as simple as a blues-laden music cue, or Montoya carjacks legendary Frank Darabont, that just has that sort of sweaty Western feel. Or, of course, that great shot of the team walking towards the nest, a thing of beauty. There seems to be a general consensus that Vampires peaks at the Motel Massacre. Also, a nice touch calling it the Sun God Motel. I don't necessarily agree. I think it's kind of a cheap out for folks not really into the story at hand. Though I will admit that starting off with that intense and wild opening 20 minutes may not have been the best pacing-wise, as Vampires ends up being more of a slow burn procedural about the inner workings of vampire hunters and what happens when they finally meet their match. What comes after the Nest and Motel Massacre scenes are still great stuff, but they do fail to have that sort of wham-bam adrenaline impact. And it doesn't help that we start off with a ragtag group of hunters using a unique method to rid vampire nests only to immediately kill them all off. I mean, let's be fair, that's like an entire movie on its own, and starting off with it kind of hurts what comes after. Now, I don't believe the story of the first vampire looking for a Black Cross artifact being hunted by Woods and Baldwin isn't great on its own. But in terms of style and pacing, it is a bit of a bait and switch, and I think this is a leading cause of hesitation and somewhat negative reviews. And it also doesn't help that we underutilize two of the Colombian gang members from Predator 2, long live El Scorpio, and Shang Tsung himself. Why put Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa in a movie and then not use him? But I think one needs to view the movie on the whole story that is being told. And though it's more methodical in its development, still kicks ass with a few gory set pieces, and of course, James Woods chewing the scenery.
Give me the cross. Let me just ask you one thing. After 600 years, how's that dick working? Pretty good?
Now, let's go with some best scenes. That opening hunt where they drag each vampire outside is brilliant. It may be a tad convoluted and impractical, but watching each one scream to death as the flare visual bursts from their inside is Carpenter being cool as one can be. The Motel Massacre. The drinking, hookers, and overall party vibe. I really don't understand you could watch a scene and not absolutely love it. And to me, it's good to see everybody so damn happy. It's kind of weird viewing it, though, in modern times, because I immediately think, Who's gonna be pissed at this now? But you know what? It's fun, schlocky, and lets you know that after a hard day's work, these guys need to wind down. And also like to invest in the local economy. I mean, I don't know, job savers, if you ask me. The cleanup scene where Crow goes back to, tie up loose ends. And of course, the invasion at the monastery. In the end, I get that this isn't ranking at the top of any Carpenter lists, and that's fine. A small-scale vampire flick with an anti-hero late into the man's career, it just didn't pop as much as I would have hoped. The gore is great, with Greg Nicotero being a part of the effects team, a solid score by the director himself, a capable villain with Thomas Ian Griffith as Valak, and a shit ton of great dialogue. John Carpenter's Vampires is an underrated entry in the director's filmography. And if you could find a way to view it as its own single story, there's a great time to be had. So leave your sensitivities at the door and enjoy this cool and slightly campy ride back to the late 90s.
Ah, John Carpenter. I get a big dumb smile across my face when I even mention him. He's my favorite director of all time by a country mile, and his Kurt Russell holy trinity of Big Trouble in Little China, Escape from New York, and The Thing are in my top 5 movies of all time, too. And yeah, I know they did Escape from LA and the Elvis TV movie together too, but those don't quite crack my top 5. His catalog is full of heavy hitters, underappreciated gems, and even a few misfires. The 90s pretty much encapsulates this formula for Carpenter, with In the Mouth of Madness now being rightly seen as a classic, Vampires and Memoirs of an Invisible Man being misfires, and today's selection, Village of the Damned, being an underappreciated gem buried under the guise that it was a miss. Now, this movie isn't an outright classic by any means, but it's definitely better than its reputation. It's got a lot of the Carpenter flair you'd expect from his films. You get a couple Carpenter regulars sprinkled in with George Buck Flower and Peter Jason thrown into minor roles, John doing the score again, and while there's no Dean Cundy behind the camera, it has a very Carpenter-esque movie feel to it. And yeah, the score maybe isn't his best, but I'll take his music over a lot of other composers. So why didn't it do well, and why is it not beloved today? The movie sits with a 30% Rotten Tomatoes score and made only $9.4 million on its $22 million budget. Ouch. That's a certifiable flop. While Carpenter was a hired gun here and would later admit to not having his full heart behind it, and it really didn't become a mega behemoth, albeit much later like his other remake or reimagining The Thing would be, it's far from his worst and deserves a second look. This remake is of a 1960 release of the same name that would also get a quasi-sequel in 1964. The novel, The Midwich Cuckoos, was written by sci-fi legend John Wyndham just 3 years prior to that film's release. Our movie starts with an ominous presence that floats towards a small coastal town. Oddly enough, this was a town that Carpenter knew quite well, and they unfortunately made filming quite difficult to finish. This strange dark cloud makes its way through the town of Midwich while we get to meet some of our principal characters. The town doctor, played by the ever-amazing Christopher Reeve in his last filmed performance before his horrific accident, wakes up feeling that something isn't quite right. He can't explain it, but he's definitely rattled. The town schoolteacher and her husband discuss having a baby before pulling up to the town fair, where we get to meet the town priest played by none other than Mark Hamill. It's so weird to see him in a non-Star Wars role, and hell, for some generations, to see him at all, as he's done so much voice work for cartoons and video games.
You just don't know when to quit, do you?
We see the great Buck Flower as the school janitor, and he could be the same guy from Escape from New York or They Live for all we know. We were so lucky to have Buck and didn't even know it at the time.
Blow it out your ass.
The whole town passes out at the same time, and anyone who enters the town suffers the same fate. This leads to some unfortunate deaths, including the husband of our teacher friend who passes out at the wheel when he enters the town's space. Even the police that go in to investigate pass out a few feet in. Not even gas masks can stop this phenomenon. When you enter the affected zone, then that's it. Our good doctor was out of town and gets back to meet Kirstie Alley's scientist character, Dr. Susan Werner. This really is her only genre output aside from her appearance in Star Trek II from 1982. She's fine in this. Fine. Doesn't ruin the movie, but could have been replaced by really anyone and you wouldn't notice. That tale as old as time happens, where 12 of the women wake up from a mysterious outage pregnant, and apart from the couple of deaths that occurred due to people passing out at the wrong place at the wrong time, life in this small town goes back to normal. Meredith Salinger, on the other hand, has a brief but memorable part as Melanie, one of the ladies in town who now has a kid on the way. Most people are actually pretty excited about it, including the good doctor and his wife, but there are a few outliers.
They are all gonna be deformed!
Outliers that don't really have a plausible explanation why they are with child now.
I can't keep it. I mean, it can't be Ben's. The Roberts girl is a virgin.
Nothing seems to be wrong with the children so far, but Dr. Chaffee figures out all of them happened during the incident. Dr. Werner comes to town to offer quite a lot of money per family, and everyone decides to go through with it.
All prenatal expenses paid. You'll also receive $3,000 monthly as an allowance.
What if your wife and your daughter both have kids?
Then you would receive $6,000.
Righteous bucks.
Partly because the offer is too good to pass up, and partly because they all have terrible nightmares. All of the women give birth the same night in a converted barn, and everything goes well except for Melanie, who unfortunately loses her baby. 6 boys and 5 girls survive the night, and Dr. Werner becomes a creeper and makes off with the stillborn body. Life gets back to mostly normal again, or at least as normal as this weird situation can be. The children are of course closely monitored, and it seems as if they're all hyper-intelligent and have their DNA so similar they could all be from the same family. Hyper-intelligence isn't the only gift though, oh no. And we see the Chaffee baby use some sort of trance power with her light-up eyes to force her mom to dip her arm into a boiling pot. Not cool. The kids, well, the kids aren't alright. I know it's incredibly hard for a lot of kids to do right in their horror roles, but we have enough good examples that I can feel okay about getting put off by it. The costumes and special effects do them no favors either. The eye graphic is fine, it even changes color throughout the movie, though with no explanation. But the wigs do not work, and only young David, played by Thomas Dekker, is believable and remotely compelling. Overall, I think the kids work better in black and white like the original. Dekker, no relation to wonderful creator Fred Dekker, would have quite the career after this with voice work in multiple American Tale and Land Before Time films, taking over as the young Selinsky in the TV version of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and eventually being the youngish John Connor in the criminally underrated Sarah Connor Chronicles. After those, he would nab a role in the Nightmare on Elm Street remake and in the cult sequel Chrome Skull 2. Mrs. Chaffee can't take it anymore, and with a little push from her daughter, leaps to her death off the side of a cliff, and we get a great bit of audio of Christopher Reeve finding her. He was so good, we lost him way too early. We then get the most random added shot ever, with Dr. Werner in a blacked out room explaining what we just saw, as if it wasn't clear. The kids are grown up and only travel in a pack and definitely don't mess around. They blind an optometrist and generally have the whole town spooked. The school teacher doesn't even want to teach them anymore and asks Dr. Chaffee if he will take over, as they seem to respect him. Young David shows some empathy, something the others completely lack, and runs into Melanie, who he sees a vision of her shooting herself, which sadly comes true. The kids now take over the barn, and Dr. Chaffee reluctantly agrees to teach them after a conversation with David gives him hope that there's some redeeming value here. A hope that unfortunately fades away immediately when they kill poor old drunk Buck Flower. I mean, how could you forgive anyone for taking out the great Buck? In what could have been a cooler scene, it's neutered by either lack of budget or studio interference. All of the kills, in fact, lack any kind of punch. There's some interesting beginnings of some, and some haunting off-screen kills, but overall, they decided to defang their R-rated movie. Things get out of hand quick, and Werner explains to Chaffee that they aren't the only small town with horrifying children. She explains the 3 options, one of which includes an extraterrestrial impregnation, and even shows them the fetus of the dead child. Spoiler alert, it's an alien. An alien that they borrowed from the X-Files opening credits by the look of it, but an alien all the same. I really don't love this explanation, and the top of my list would be to leave it alone altogether. Are they demon seeds, alien visitors, government mistakes? Let it have a little zest, a little mystery to it. The kids decide to move into the barn, and when the parents try to collect them,
I'm bringing her home.
They get picked off one by one. Dr. Chaffee goes to talk to them one last time to see if they're salvageable, and it's another great showcase for Reeve as he speaks to them in desperate or pleading tones, in addition to asking them the simple questions and giving them grief about their answers.
You should feel something!
He does figure out that he can block his thoughts from them and uses this to hatch a plan as the kids decide to leave the town altogether.
You're blocking your thoughts rather effectively with this image. We must leave here. Spread out.
The townspeople then go full in the mouth of madness, and they get about what you'd expect. While Dr. Werner gets the most painful and slow death in the movie. While this one doesn't show much, it's admittedly pretty horrifying. Dr. Chaffee loads up a bag with just enough C4 to make school out forever, and locks David's mother in the school. The military shows up and does slightly worse than the Chicago PD do chasing down the Blues Brothers. The kids show off the remainder of their tricks with their skittle pack of colored eyes that mostly makes the police blockade become the Wild Bunch. Dr. Chaffee arrives too late to save anyone there, but goes in to stall the kids. He does ask David to get his notebook, but he's told no. When the kids try to read his mind, they are met with a literal brick wall. There's some really great stuff here, with Reeves stalling the kids, and every time he looks at the clock, the kids do too. They just can't break him, but it's taking everything he has. David's mother tries to get him, but the kids stop her all while the clock ticks away. The damned use their combined force to slowly break down the wall in Alan's mind, while David and his mom slip out the back after David pushes the leader, who also happens to be Alan's daughter. This push finally lets him break free from the group and stands up for, well, anything. Unfortunately, the harder the kids try, the more they turn alien looking, and it really detracts from a tense and, forgive me, explosive scene. Alan took out the brood, and David is on the road trip with his mom, while we are left to wonder what the hell is going through that kid's mind. This movie isn't a horror masterpiece, one of the great remakes of all time, or even in the top 10 John Carpenter movies, but it has value. I kind of picked at it here and there, but the movie as a whole is pretty well made and entertaining to watch. It's worth it for Christopher Reeve alone, not only being his last film performance, but also having one of the best acting performances in a John Carpenter movie. Scream Factory gave it some love a few years ago, and if you want to pick that up, I recommend you do too. Even a messy miss from Carpenter is better than a lot of stuff you can give 90 minutes to.
Though 90s Carpenter isn't at the level of his brilliant 80s streak, of course, it holds up far better than most would admit, and hits both with sincerity, good fun, and a few genuine chills. And today I want to give some love and appreciation to his entry into the anthology subgenre. Clearly a labor of love, and one made with every genre friend he had, it seems. So today let's travel back to the simpler times of 1993 to hang out with the coroner and discuss this often forgotten entry in Carpenter's filmography. Today we talk body bags. Supposedly Showtime's answer to Tales from the Crypt, body bags came at an interesting crossroads in Carpenter's career. The 80s had just passed, and he had jumped from an independent film, They Live, to a studio picture with Memoirs of an Invisible Man, which I'll admit right now I do have a soft spot for. And it nearly derailed his career. Makes heavy studio interference with an out-of-control Chevy Chase, and you get a movie that Carpenter says he, and I quote, hates thinking about the most. And it's why I've always liked him as a writer and director. He seems to have always seen the charade of Hollywood and could smell the bullshit from a mile away. And because of this, he almost walked away. Memoirs almost ended Carpenter's career. And so you need to view Body Bags from this perspective, because it's clearly a work of a man who wanted to have fun, and at a time in his life where making interesting little stories with his friends and enjoying life topped, trying to make something truly new and unique. You know, he wasn't trying to make a horror masterpiece here.
Generally speaking, I hate anthologies. I desperately hate them, but for television, I thought it was okay.
And though Body Bags may not be top-tier Carpenter, and I would never argue that it is, it's obvious that love went into making this, and that he had a blast doing it. Cut into 3 segments with a wraparound, our guide and premise is focused around the coroner. a dead comedic horror host who loves a good pun and enjoys a home pour of his favorite drink, formaldehyde.
What the hell? One more for the road. Just a dash.
It's in this morgue that the coroner tells the tales of the dead that lie before him, giving us a perfect horror setting for an anthology. Now, right off the bat, you can see some of the Tales from the Crypt parallels. We get a thin and dead host with long, scruffy hair that has a healthy sense of humor, leading us into each entry, and then wrapping the tale with a morality quip and a bit of levity. And can we all agree that Carpenter is surprisingly good as a coroner? Of course, he doesn't have the pizzazz of the great John Cassirer, but fuck me if Carpenter doesn't hold his own, and comes off affable, witty, and engaging. I mean, listen, I can't see Carpenter reprising this role for, multiple full seasons, but I do wish we had gotten more than this, because I love seeing my favorite chain-smoking grump happy once in a while.
The answer to every question is I'd rather be home playing Xbox. That just solves everybody's question. It solves my problem.
We start off with Gas Station, directed by Carpenter. And as a final confirmation that as heavy as things may get, we are leaning into a bit of schlock and aiming a tad more popcorn 80s than anything too bizarre or dark. We follow Anne, passenger 57's Alex Datcher, working her first shift at a gas station booth off of a desolate road. It's a classic tale of a killer on the loose. But instead of an innocent babysitter, we get a college student trying to make a few extra bucks. Still innocent though. Gas Station is a great time from beginning to end. It's that kind of old school suspense, with a stupid amount of red herrings. With even class act and professional bum, George Buck Flower getting in on a mini jump scare. I mean, 90% of this story is just kind of waiting to see when the killer will arrive. And oh, they will. But we get the who's who of horror cameos. This is what I meant by hanging out and making movies with your friends. One, somehow Wes Craven pulls a rug from under all of us and is really good as the suspicious drunk. I mean, look at his eyes and his mannerisms. I mean, this is some solid stuff, man. And who would have thought? Sam Raimi plays the employee of the month, who's the victim stuffed in the closet. And Peter Jason shows up in what may be the best part, as a clearly intoxicated player who's on his way somewhere but is just having the time of his life. Just driving buzzed and loving it all.
You're a little glum tonight, huh? What's wrong? You ought to be out partying.
And of course, American Werewolf in London's David Naughton playing Pete.
Are you from Haddonfield?
Born and raised.
By the time the king of nerds himself, Robert Carradine, shows up, it's a standard slasher with a fun performance from Carradine. And, honestly, a pretty impressive kill. It's tongue-in-cheek, but is balanced by random horror players adding their weird little part. Gas Station is endearing in a strange way. There is something quaint and pleasing about this type of story, and though it may not be breaking down any barriers, I kinda hope a younger generation finds this flick and gets to experience it.
Forgot my credit card.
Next is Hair, also directed by Carpenter. And this one is for every one of us bald or thinning guys, and the trauma that comes with losing that great lion's mane to the fickle bitch that is life. Only Carpenter sees the humor in the situation and goes full camp, and this is him at his most fun. Starring the man's man Stacy Keach, Richard is aggressively thinning, though the man was 52 at the time, so let's be honest, I think he looks pretty good. Hell, mine one in my 20s. But Richard is let down by life, and even though his girlfriend Megan, Sheena Easton, is super supportive and is totally fine with him looking more, distinguished, Richard starts trying all sorts of foolish fixes until he finds a television ad for a transplant. The best part is the lead up to the final straw in Richard's life, the beautiful hair montage. With even effects legend Greg Nicotero showing up with his long, golden locks. It is a flawless scene that nails the humor and tone of the whole thing. And of course the agency isn't legit, but run by aliens who look like a horny Debbie Harry and a stoic David Warner. Meaning two things to me. These aliens know about solid music, and that Mr. Waxwork and Secret Ooze Specialist make a hell of an alien pair. Using our vanity against us, the alien invasion has already begun. It's a goofy little ending with, maybe some iffy special effects nowadays, but it's a fun idea that is slightly winking the entire time. I. The last segment in the series comes courtesy of the legendary director Tobe Hooper and stands tall as the darkest tale here. Mark Hamill plays Brent, a professional baseball player who loses an eye in a car accident. Brutal. Can we give Hamill some love real quick? The 90s were a real cool time with him putting in some different roles. With the Carpenters remake of Village of the Damned, giving us a sniper-using Reverend and some great character range. Now, of course, the experimental transplant to replace his eye was a success, but now he's having visions from the murderous tendencies of the previous owner. And more of a descent into madness, this works because it's so different from the previous two. Now listen, suspicious southern accent on Hamill aside, Hooper lets this baby breathe with a keen visual flair and intensity that sticks out compared to the other two. Almost to a degree, one could argue it doesn't actually fit within the campy, fun tone set up by the rest of the movie. But for me, I think this sort of deviation works because it's so different. And of course, with the original TV format being the initial concept, this would have been week 3, giving us something a bit different and darker. Though it continues the trend of making movies with your friends because, of course, Roger Corman shows up as a part of the eye specialists. Everything here is bleak, and Brent's descent into madness is very messy, ending with a suicide in order to save his wife. As I've often said, Hooper was a far more of a diverse and talented director than he gets credit for. And though this is a short, Eye is a suspense story done right. And then the twist of it all, which, I don't know, for some reason I'm assuming might have been a reshoot, shows that the coroner to be nothing more than an undead John Doe, with Tobe Hooper and Tom Arnold being the actual morgue workers here, getting ready for the autopsy. Cheesy, yes, of course, a tad silly, you know it, but an overall great ending to the whole thing. And of course, Carpenter is there stealing the show. I can't vouch and say this would have been a consistent series, though Masters of Horror would come around later, getting the whole famous directors to do a standalone story type of thing, and maybe Body Bags could have worked. But then if you watch the special features, it makes it clear that Carpenter wasn't really down for a series, and that these 3 stories tied with a wraparound was good enough for him. And so again, if this is something you have not seen, I cannot recommend it enough. In honor of the legend, an all-around straight shooter, I want to celebrate Body Bags as a unique entry in his filmography that is a good time from start to finish and worth the price of admission.
See that my men are well fed and bring forth the women.